Hello and welcome back to Premier Injuries. We are once again talking about the Euros, and once again I do have to remind you to like, share this video, but also subscribe to the channel, get involved with the comments below, because we've got a competition on. We're giving away FanTeam tickets for your chance to win £200,000 or a share of the 1 million cash pot. I mean, it was ridiculous. In terms of statistics, it's about 1 in 8 people who enter the tournament go away with some sort of prize money. It's eye-watering stuff. It's so exciting, and we're happy to be giving those away to 10 lucky people. Well, it's 9 now because we've just given one away. Ben, who was the lucky winner of that competition?
Catches Ben on the hop and quickly checks his notes. The first winner of our first giveaway ticket for the Euro, and it was Dan Wilson.
Well done,
Congratulations, Dan. We announced that on social media around about 30 minutes ago, so 30 minutes before recording, and I understand that your FanTeam account has already been credited with your free ticket. Good luck, my friend. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and commenting. That's all you've got to do, folks.
Really easy stuff to be in with that huge chance, but also part of the FanTeam experience is getting your players right. It's a fantasy Premier League kind of style stuff anyway, so you have to be really good with your player picks, and this is what we're here for. We're talking about Group C today. I think this is quite an interesting group with maybe some differential ordinary picks, and first and foremost we're going to start with Austria. FIFA ranking of 23. They qualified second but actually had an expected position of first. Looking at them, they had 19 goals in qualification, and this is where they had a huge underperformance of just 25 expected goals, so they should have scored about 25 and only scored 19. And in goals conceded, their defence was pretty strong. They matched that. 9 goals conceded, 9.3 XGA. Their top goal scorer, Marcel Sabitsa, we'll get onto that actually in a minute, Ben, because there is injury news about him. But just quickly, yeah, one of the standout things for me was Austria underperforming in qualification in terms of expected points. So to me, that kind of says that their strike force isn't that great. And the fact that Marcel Sabitsa has these question marks over his head also adds problems. But I think the group that they're in, they can do fairly all right. They continued fairly good form in the Nations League after qualifying. They topped their group. They got promotion by winning 4 games, losing once and drawing once. But their qualification in terms of the World Cup has not been great, because they did get a win against Faroe Islands, a draw to Scotland, but then they were demolished by Denmark. So it's an inconsistently consistent side looking at them. I mean, is there any attraction there just on the kind of opener there towards Austria? And also, can you explain the Arnautovic situation, Ben?
Yes, I'll touch on Arnautovic. First of all, obviously he missed the game against England in that recent friendly. I understand it's more of a precautionary measure. There's a thigh muscle strain there. So, you know, that's familiar with, well, we've seen that with Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's, you know, that's what happened when he, you know, ruling out for up to 6 weeks. So Austria are, you know, right to treat this one very carefully, because it's one that can be aggravated, and it is something that can keep players out long term. So for Arnautovic, we hope, and at this point in time, it doesn't look like it's anything too serious, and it certainly doesn't look as if it's going to keep him out of the tournament. So that was more of a precautionary measure. So we're still, you know, happy, confident, and optimistic that there won't be any sort of long-term complications or issues in that regard. And with regards to Austria, how sweet are they actually look bright. In patches against England. I don't think they were overawed by the occasion. They certainly didn't look out of their depth. Maybe a little bit unfortunate not to get on the score sheet. I think there's 1 or 2 occasions where they may have hit the woodwork. Jordan Pickford pulled off a couple of good saves in there. So, you know what it is. they're capable of maybe causing an upset or two, overall in that group. And I know we're going to touch on, the rest of those teams. The Netherlands, for me, I will go into great idea. There's big question marks. And North Macedonia, and I know we've had this conversation off air. I still think that there may be something in that team, and the Ukraine aren't a pushover. So it's a very, very tight group for me, and there might be a little bit of luck could just tip the scales in one of those teams fails, and it may be Austria. I'm just not quite sure. But look, it's a tough one to call. I think that's what we can agree on.
Well, I think the other thing with Austria as well, in terms of fantasy assets, as I said there, the team in terms of form have been consistently inconsistent, but even in terms of the selection of the side, you can't be too sure who's starting, where they're playing on the pitch. And I think this is really reflected in the fact that David Alaba, who is one of my favourites in terms of FanTeam, is a defender in that, nicely priced on that. Then when you get to Fantasy Euro, all of a sudden he's a midfielder. So you're not really too sure. With the Arnautovic situation, if he is fit, will he be played up front or will he be played on the left? And that might affect Alaba's position. So a lot of it is up in the air. And I think one of the big worries for me as well is you don't know who's going to be 100% the goalkeeper. Alexander Schlager has been playing recently, but then Watford's Daniel Bachmann has also made a really good case for himself with a lot of clean sheets. I think the backline pairing of Dragovic and Hint and Rager, I think that's how you pronounce it, unless you got corrections, Ben, they're probably likely to have that, double up there in the team. So they're probably one of the people that is fine. And then in the middle of the pitch, they will have a double pivot of players. I don't think you really need to kind of cover in terms of fantasy. Baumgartlinger and Islanka are the two there. Again, not really ones that we're too interested in. So the ones that I think is Alaba, but I like him more in FanTeam because he's a defensive asset. And I would say nicely priced as well in terms of it. He's looking really good. He probably comes into the tournament on a bit of a high as well from the fact that he is joining Real Madrid. But 5.0 for him as a really creative kind of player is fantastic. But then, as I said there, on the Fantasy Euro, he's a 5.5 midfielder. And I think he just loses that appeal then, purely because he might be playing as a defender in this tournament. He will be making lots of runs and be creative and involved in the Austria attack. But there's that kind of double thing we kind of seen with John Lundstrom in terms of Fantasy Premier League or any of the good players like Robertson or TAA this season. If they have that ability as a defender to get those clean sheet points, then it adds to it. Whereas I think as a midfielder, you're purely relying on him getting attacking returns. And I don't think that is as likely as with some other players that are, priced around him. I think he's maybe a little bit too high, and I'd just be happy to have him in kind of FanTeam. But going up the pitch, there's somebody else in the team that has the similar problem to Alaba, that you don't know where he's going to play. But it is Marcel Selbitsa. I think looking at his underlying data, he's quite an interesting player. Historically, he has played at times as a striker, but I think it's quite unlikely. But he is a very attacking midfielder. At RB Leipzig, he's been pushing as kind of a winger, very rarely a striker, but he is so attack-minded. And it's the data that I quite like. Higher XG per 90 in the top 8% in Europe, but he also is good for teammates as well, with an average high XA per 90, lots of key passes, progressive passer as well. And so this is kind of culminated in a top 15% goal creating actions per 90. And so kind of switching the attention again to the two main ones that we're looking at in terms of FanTeam and fantasy teams. So in terms of Fantasy Euro, Marcel Sabitsa is 8 million rated. And then when you look at him on FanTeam, this is why I think he's so exciting. He's 5.5. You know, somebody there who is playing North Macedonia in the first game. Again, with tactics and things like that, we'll cover it a bit more with our teams. But I think that's a really good opening game for him. I think for 5.5, even the 8 in terms of the Euro Fantasy official, I think is still pretty appealing for somebody who has some good fixtures against Ukraine. Even the Netherlands recently, I don't think that they have been that good defensively. I think we're going to cover that. So Marcel Sabitsa, I think, is a great shout. So kind of those two individuals there, Ben, before I get onto the tactics of the team, did they appeal to you at all?
Alaba, certainly on FanTeam. It looks like he's been priced up and placed based on his domestic form. If you look at his heat maps for Bayern Munich, predominantly he is in that, you know, that on down that left-hand side, you know, for the Bundesliga outfit. More you know, with it, there's a defensive side to his game with that. But when you see him for the national team, you know, his heat maps suggest he looks more as if he's a left winger in terms of where he's playing and spends most of his time. So the fact that you maybe he's getting an out of position player, and that does appeal. And at the price, you know, 5 million, it's not a big chunk of change, you know. So and with a tight group, I think, you know, there is strong possibilities of clean sheets. But then, you know, there is a few unknown quantities there, and I certainly wouldn't rule out the possibility of maybe picking up a goal, or at least creating some chances. Sabitsa, yeah, he's okay. I mean, I know you've brought this up. You never mentioned it today, but in the stat pack that you did, you create and will be going live on the Premier Injuries website along on the Euro table. Now, I have to check my words and make sure that I get this right. Sasa Kaladinic.
Yes.
I think. Yeah, so and this guy has been in red hot form for Stuttgart this season. 23 starts, 33 appearances all told, 21 goal involvement, 16 goals, 5 assists. He's got 3 in 3 for the recent World Cup qualifying games. So again, you know, we've talked about European qualifying, which is, you know, that was almost 12 months ago. So recent form, you know, what's happened in this last year suggests that, you know, this is a guy that's in form. He's doing the business, and he comes off the back of a really successful season, and he's attracting interest, you know, from the Premier League. Both Tottenham reportedly and West Ham have taken a look at this striker. So, you know, this could be the ideal platform for him to go out and show the rest of Europe what he's capable of doing. And again, we're talking about a player who's priced at 6 million, you know, 23-year-old. He's got the world at his feet. And he would be one that, you know, maybe I would give some serious consideration to.
Yeah, and the thing is, as well, as he wasn't on penalties for Stuttgart, so all his goal creations, so he had non-penalty goals per 90 of 0.67, so that's in the top 5 percentile. In terms of his XG and his kind of XG per shot, they weren't high, but then for me, there's almost the argument that the fact that he doesn't have a really high XG, that his XG per shot wasn't crazy high, shows that he's a competent finisher and he's getting into the right positions. He knows how to play the game. So I think I'm really glad that you actually brought him up, because I almost forgot to mention him in my bit there. In terms of FanTeam and for Fantasy Euro, I think he's nicely priced. And the fact that there's question marks over Arnautovic as well, he could be starting up there. He's been in fantastic form. He is slightly more expensive than Arnautovic, but I think he's almost maybe a little bit more nailed than Arnautovic, because he's got form and fitness on his side, and it's almost a question of when Arnautovic will play. And in terms of the Fantasy Euro, he is classed as a forward. So in both he's classed as a forward. I would like to have seen him as a midfielder, just for those extra points when he scores a goal. But he's still an attractive prospect. And just quickly to talk through the tactics of the team so that you know what to expect when you watch. Now, Austria, again, consistently inconsistent. They're tactically malleable, number of formations deployed, but in the big games, they seem to have 4 at the back and then 2-3-1 formation. They like to keep possession, so they're quite a ball possession-based team, carve out high-quality chances, and that, again, bodes well for the likes of Arnautovic and Kaladic. I hope I get that right. But they're not totally set on a certain style, so it's not always passing into the box. It's not always crosses into the box. That can be a positive in that sense. It can be a negative in the sense that maybe they're too pragmatic and don't concentrate on what is good for them. And in terms of it defensively, I think they've been fairly solid. You might expect 1 or 2 clean sheets, and that's why Alaba is probably a good own. I reckon they could do against Ukraine. They could do against North Macedonia if they just kind of keep to their proactive pressing style. So yeah, they're quite a fun team to watch actually in terms of it, because they're pressing, they like to keep possession, they like to play good football in that sense. But let's move it on to the team that historically are the team of beautiful football, the Netherlands. Now, there's a lot of positivity around them, which maybe this is controversial. I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, Ben, but I think it's a little bit unfounded. They do have a FIFA ranking of 16th, qualification position of 2nd, expected position of 1st. And I think that already rang some alarm bells, the fact that they underperformed a little bit. And that kind of came down to defensive lapses. They seem to have almost a mistake in them each game. One of the most fascinating things coming into this tournament is it's 7 years since we last saw a Dutch team at a major tournament, and that was the 2014 World Cup. And this will be the first, possibly their first win in a European Championship game since 2008. I mean, this is a Dutch team that really hasn't been in the fold. And as I said, they're a historical team that played some fantastic football, but it hasn't been them recently. One of my biggest concerns, though, is they come into the tournament not on great form. They've not played really well in their most recent matches, but the biggest worry is the changeover in manager. I don't like De Boer. I know him from his time at Crystal Palace. I think a lot of people will. Inter Milan, he was sacked there at both of those clubs. And also his most recent job of Atalanta United, he was sacked there as well. He actually joined a team that had won the MLS, and then the team became one of the worst sides in the league, and he was sacked in July 2020. If you read the Dutch press, if you read kind of the mumblings around him, a lot of people were questioning even him being appointed. And if you compare his numbers to Koeman, who came before him, Koeman had a 55% win rate. De Boer only has 44.4%, but there's a definite downturn in actual output. De Boer has only 2 goals on average per game, whereas Koeman had 2.15. And again, the defensive numbers have decreased. They're letting in more goals, so 1.1 per game as instead of 0.9 under Koeman. So that's a fairly big difference, almost a fifth of a goal each game that they're letting in more, and they're kind of punished. And I think the most recent game of Scotland was almost emblematic of this, because you can explain a little bit better, Ben, but Scotland were missing 7 players, weren't they, from COVID?
Yeah, John McGinn, so there's a lot of associated missing from that. And I spoke on a podcast prior to this and talked about these non-competitive friendly. What I did urge was caution in terms of, if you do your due diligence and you do your research, don't be swayed by these games. A lot of people have Scotland as their whipping boys in heading into this tournament. They will look at that result against the Netherlands with those players missing, thinking actually maybe they have got a chance. But I think the reality is, what you see is managers and players more or less know to a degree. They know who's starting that first game. There's maybe one or two places up for grabs. Other than that, a good 8 or 9 are typically set in stone for that first game. And players will not be going, eyes out 100%. They will hold back. They want to make sure that, they are fit. They're not going to take any unnecessary risks. And like you said, this isn't the Dutch side of old. These aren't the teams with the Van Bastens and the Hullets and the Rijkaards, and then Van Nistelrooy's. They're an okay team, and nothing more than that, with a very, very average, maybe it's even, I'm doing him a bit of too much credit there, of a manager and coach. And they're on my watch list for teams who could potentially really flop in this tournament.
Yeah, and in terms of it, I think some of their assets are a little bit overpriced as well. One other kind of controversial thing that has come out of the camp, Jasper Cillessen has not made the squad. Now, originally it was explained, and maybe you can open out this more, that it was down to COVID-19, but Cillessen came out and told the Dutch paper Der Telegraaf, I really had no idea what has changed. I never heard anything else until the national coach called me on Tuesday. So it was a little bit of a shock to him, and I think that puts a bit of shockwaves into the squad as well, upsetting the apple cart that somebody so big is being almost frozen out of the side.
Yeah, a scapegoat there, nice. For being an ex-Newcastle player, Tim Krul is the goalkeeper that is expected to step up and come in as a Dutch number one. And in that regard, having seen Tim Krul firsthand on several occasions, top draw goalkeeper, I really do like him. But yeah, look, he's shaking up that Dutch team. It's not really how you want to go in to a major tournament. I think morale in the dressing room and those relationships need to be strong. Those bonds need to be strong. And yeah, I think officially, the official call was due to COVID. But now when players are coming out in an almost disputing fact, then that causes murmurings, and that just maybe underlines the manager's authority within that squad. It causes a little bit of unrest, and of course it comes in a time where you should be focused on the football, and this is just detracting and taking things away from that. So for me, like I say, it's a tough call with that Dutch squad, and it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't win the group as many people are expecting them to.
Yeah, and looking at FanTeam, Matthijs de Ligt is priced at 6 mil, so is Stefan de Vrij, who I think are the most likely starters. If you look at the defence, Matthijs de Ligt is still 5.5. I still think that's quite expensive. I'm not too sure if they will keep clean sheets. The other thing, another worrying thing, is you're not too sure who the wing-backs are. And I don't think De Boer is as well, because he came out after the game against Scotland and he said that Quincy Menig is perfect to play the right-back role. But Quincy Menig is not in the squad. So he doesn't even seem to know who is in his team. So yeah, there's a lot of problems there. But we'll get on to, I think, two players that might do all right. One of them, and I know that you like him, Georginio Wijnaldum. I think he's a cheap and interesting way into the side because of the fact that he's been involved in a lot of the side's attacks in qualifiers in his last 16 appearances. And this may shock people that do watch a lot of the Premier League. He has 13 goal involvements with 11 goals and 2 assists. Much more of a rarity of his time at Liverpool, but for the Dutch team, he is quite the attacking player. He also managed the most shots in the box of any Dutch player during the qualifiers, and I think that's a pretty mean feat with, maybe Memphis Depay in there as somebody that you'd expect to be shooting most of the time. I think he's fairly differential, so in terms of the Euros, he's owned by 6% of players. He's nicely priced at 8. I think that's not a bad price at all for him. And in terms of FanTeam, he's actually a little bit cheaper at 7. So I think he's a fairly good own. The only reason why I've gone with Depay is the set piece work. I think Depay has that potential, and also penalties. I don't want to load up too much on the Netherlands because I have the same reservations as you. But if you want to save a little bit of money, I think Wijnaldum's actually a decent shout as maybe somebody a bit different who will be involved in the goals. And just quickly on Memphis Depay, one of the undoubted stars in European football right now. I'm not sure if it has been confirmed, but it looks like he will be going to Barcelona. And his underlying stats at this point are just ridiculous. His XG per 90, 98th percentile. His XA per 90, 99th percentile. Some of his attacking numbers have improved by the fact that he takes penalties, but he's somebody with serious talent. Overall, his shot creating actions and ball creating actions are both in the top 5% in Europe's top 5 leagues. So I think he's a great player to own for the tournament. I mean, if you were to plumb for one or the other, do you have a favourite?
There's a lot to like about Depay for all of the reasons you've outlined. And I'll chuck one more statistic in there across Europe's top 5 leagues in terms of number of shots, which we all know on the new scoring matrix and FanTeam, there are a points allocation for shots. Depay is only second behind, would you like to hazard a guess who has had the most shots across the top 5 leagues in Europe this season?
Sir Harold of Kane?
He is up there, but hold on, let's save that.
It's not Joe Linton, is it?
Very, very, very close. No, it's the winger himself. It's CR7. Oh. It's Cristiano.
Similar players.
So Depay is just behind him in terms of the actual number of shots that he manages to get off. And look, so he doesn't need to score, to be attracting points, and that's good. But I've made the comments past as well, and I just want to quickly mention this about Gini. Almost fantasy managers coming into this game need a shift of mindset from what they've seen domestically to what they can expect in this international tournament. And Wijnaldum is a completely different beast for the Netherlands than what he is at Liverpool. And, I think it's 7 million as well on FanTeam. I do think that is a bargain. That is something that maybe would pique me interest. Whether I have the confidence to double up, I'm not so sure. On individuals, you've got De Jong in there. Berghuis is coming off the back of another. In fact, he's had 3 great seasons, I think, since he's left Watford, where he really struggled. But I think as a Feyenoord, he's been absolutely outstanding. So when you look at the team individually, they should do really well. But the concerns over the coach and like I say, morale within the camp, it's just enough to maybe put me off going too heavy on the Dutch.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ben. And the fact that he threw 5 out of the back, apparently, again, Dutch media was saying that was a real shock to a lot of the players because he'd mostly used 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3. So there seems to be a lot of problems there. I mean, in terms of attack, they'll be trying to keep possession. They'll be having high-quality shots. Defensive phase, they'll be pressing. But a lot of it is down to problems with the manager. Let's move on to Macedonia then. They are FIFA ranking 62nd in the world. They qualified a position of 3rd, expected position of 5th. I mean, these are one of... So yeah, Macedonia have that kind of fairy tale story of getting into this tournament. They didn't score a lot, they conceded a lot, so they are quite lucky to be there. In terms of their top goal scorer, if you're going to be looking, I think it's Elif Elmas. They're probably one of the people that you want to go for, but we'll analyse that a little bit more. And then Alioski, who we will know from Leeds, is another one with 4 assists in that European qualification. He could be a decent one as well. But yeah, the side entered the tournament with having a negative XG difference, which I kind of highlighted yesterday with a Group B team. It's not something that you want to have. But even though this is an unlikely team being there, they've done well recently. They've only lost 2 of their last 10 games. They've bounced back from defeat with a huge win against Liechtenstein of 5-0, and then a shocking win over Germany. So, as you said there, Ben, this is a team full of surprises, a box of tricks. I think Alioski's probably the only defensive asset that I would look at because of his attacking appeal. I'm not sure how many clean sheets Macedonia will get, but his assist ability is fantastic. So I think that's there. But yeah, let's talk about Elmas, because at club level he's managed some pretty attractive attacking numbers. Top 5% in Europe's top 5 leagues for XG per 90, top 2% amongst midfielders for non-penalty XG per 90, and his shots are of high quality as well. He's in the top 6% across the continent. So I think some people emotionally are attracted to Goran Pandev. A lot of people who are Football Manager fans will remember that he was a great own in some of those games, and obviously he won the Champions League with Inter Milan all those years ago. But realistically, there's only 2 assets that I would have my eye on. Or have I got that wrong, Ben? Is there anybody else that we should turn our attentions to?
I wish I could shed some light on this North Macedonian team and pick out a gem, but I can't. So, I mean, just to add to what you've already covered, Alioski, as well as his attacking prowess, he's on penalties. So, that, and always good having, a defender who's potentially on spot kit duty. And often referred to, I'm reliably told, as the Macedonian Messi, Eljif Elmas. Look, he's at Napoli, so he's obviously got something about him. I think he's only had 3 starts, 30 appearances, so the majority of those minutes have come from the bench. But in terms of recent attacking outputs, 2 and 3 in World Cup qualifying, 4 and 10 from those European qualifiers, and he got the goal in Germany in that shock 2-1 win. So he could be a guy for the big stage. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, there is something there. I'm not quite writing North Macedonia off just yet. It's their opportunity to shine on the big stage for their first time ever. They're a complete unknown quantity, and they could come in and cause a few surprise shock results, or they could absolutely bomb. But it's at 5 million, Elmas, look, I think I'm happy to take a punt and certainly have him on my bench at that price for FanTeam.
Yeah, for me it's quite interesting that actually in terms of for FanTeam there, he's 5 mil. In terms of Fantasy Euro, he's a little bit more expensive at 6 mil. But for me, it's fascinating that Alioski is 4% owned in the community on the Euro Fantasy. He's a 4.5 defender in both FanTeam and Fantasy Euro. I think he's a fair bench, facilitator. And there is that opportunity there, as you said, assists, but also penalties. But Elmas, he's less than 1% owned, whereas Goran Pandev, as I said, there is 1% owned. It beggars for belief for me a little bit that 6.5 forward Pandev is in a lot of people's teams. But, people play fantasy how they want. They might just go in there emotionally. But I think it's the name that's grabbing headlines. Whereas if you said there, the Macedonian Messi, Elmas, he should be somebody that you might consider because he's so cheap. 5 million in terms of FanTeam. He could be somebody that you have on your bench. A lot of people are getting Hamsik in from Slovenia. But if you have Elmas in, he's 0.5 mil more, but he's a guaranteed starter, and also he is involved with the goals, So having a strong bench, I think, will serve you well in this tournament as well, where I expect, and you can open out more in another video, Ben, of a lot of rotation, a lot of players rested. Let's get on to the final team. which is Ukraine. And just quickly, I have to say they had one of my favourite songs in Eurovision. So, you know, I've got a soft spot for the side here. But in terms of their footballing ability, they ranked 24th for FIFA ranking. They qualified first and they had an expected position of third. So, and get this, it is the legend that is Andrei Shevchenko is their manager. He did quite a good job in qualification. 6 wins, 2 draws, 17 goals scored, and only 4 conceded. And what's interesting is they overperformed on goals scored by about 6. So it was an XG of 11, and goals conceded was 10.1. So about 1.29 expected goals against per 90, and only conceded 4. So it was a shock to see them finish ahead of Serbia and Portugal. So this initially, when you look at it on paper, is a side that maybe you should respect. But then you get into the nitty gritty of what we've said so many times, Ben, is the Euro qualification was a year ago. The side have really lost that fortitude in the game since. Really poor recently. Attacks have been little to nothing with just 5 goals in their last 6 games, and they've conceded 9, leading to 2 losses, 3 draws, and only 1 win. But interestingly, that 1 win did come against Spain. So they are actually entering this tournament in one of their longest ever winless runs in terms of competitive international matches. And one big worry is also that because of problems in the Ukraine and because of COVID and this and that, Ukraine have not been able to play as often as some other international managers. But yeah, looking at the team news, I'm not too sure if I'd invest in any of their defence, because I don't see them keeping many clean sheets. It's a bit like the Macedonia story. I would avoid their assets if I'm honest, but if one was to kind of look at any asset in the middle of the park, Ruslan
Malinovsky.
That's it. You know who it is. Malinovsky could be a good own because he has been deployed for set pieces, penalties. In qualification, he was busy taking the most shots of any Ukrainian player. A lot of attacks came through him. Also, this season, 20 attacking returns in the Serie A with 8 goals, 12 assists. His attacking stats are mixed with an above average XG of 0.31, but his real kind of ability comes from being able to assist his teammates. He's actually in the top 1% for XA per 90. Key passes are in the top 3%, and passes in the penalty area also a 97th percentile bit of data. So he could be an interesting own. Again, in the top 4% on the continent for goal creating actions per 90. He's probably the only one that I would consider in that team. They don't have really good strikers. Defensively, I think they're going to be porous. They lack a lot of ideas, I think, across the pitch. They have a very low XG per match, lots of speculative shots, and very few touches in the penalty area. And also they play quite negatively with a low block, incredibly high passes per defensive action. So basically no pressing at all. I mean, is there anything that is impressing you about Ukraine, apart from the man who you knew the pronunciation of?
Yeah, Malinovsky. He would be the only one for me. I think this side, this Ukrainian side, are basically the tournament's come a year too late for them, in my opinion. You need to be following on from that, that relatively successful qualifying campaign and take that into the tournament. Form has been sporadic. They have bounced back a little bit. I think it was draws and a win against Spain and France. But Malinovsky is actually, in terms of rating overall of this current squad, he's ranked as second in that Ukrainian squad by who scored. He's just behind Roman Yaremchuk. I hope I've got this. Yaremchuk. So Yaremchuk's rated at 7.26 across last season's domestically, whereas Malinovsky is 7.16. But for me, it would be Malinovsky is the only guy that I'm looking to, I've got any eyes on whatsoever. But I'm not convinced with this Ukrainian side. A lot of, the bookmakers are actually tipping the Ukrainians to potentially top that group as an outside. Is a bit of a dark horse, but I don't see it myself at this moment. It's one of those ones, I may watch them in the first game and I may be convinced and I may, look at them in a different light, but I want to see, I want to have eyes on in that first competitive game before I'm really sort of plumbing for any of their assets. I think for me, there are better players in and around their price points that I've got a better understanding, and I think we'll go deeper into the tournament.
Well, I like the fact that you brought up price points, because I think almost inexplicably he's a 7 million in fantasy Euro Malinovsky. It seems way too much, and so he's only got 1% ownership. In terms of FanTeam, I think he's probably about the right price point where you'd consider him at 5.5, and so I think that is more realistic in the pricing. It actually gives you something to properly consider, whereas the Euro fantasy pricing again is a little bit too much, and I think it just totally puts you off any sort of consideration for him, because 7 million, well, you could get a much more competent midfielder for that in that Euro game setup. So in terms of it, we have covered Ukraine, we have covered all of Group C there. And just quickly on your point about dark horses, I think that Austria might top this group instead. So in terms of the comments, do get involved below, because we finished our analysis of Group C, but the analysis does not stop, because we love chatting to you. So do you agree with me? Do you agree that Austria might top Group C? Do you agree that maybe Netherlands are not going to play as well? Or are we talking rot once again? You can get involved. We love chatting to you. Make sure to comment below. You can tweet us as well. We love receiving messages and getting involved with the community. And we'll be getting involved with the community as well. We'll be doing Rate My Teams. We'll be doing a Q&A session of injury news as well, just before the deadline, just so that you're up to date with everything that is important for your Euro fantasy teams. Before we go, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel so that you can be entered into the tournament. Send us those FanTeam IDs so that we know who you are and you can get involved. But of course, I'm going to always hand it over to Ben to see us out.
Thanks, Jason. Another fantastic show. And remember, guys, Injury Euro Table will be going live this weekend. We will have links to all our videos. We've already covered Group A and Group B. And now Group C, and also keep your eyes peeled for Mr. McKenna's comprehensive stat pack ahead of the Euros. This guy is an absolute machine. He's produced a hatful of data underpinning all of the shows. Lots and lots of hard work, and I'm telling you, you want to get your eyes on that. So that will be linked with the videos as well through the website. So yeah, look, thanks for watching. Keep all your comments coming. It's great to see, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon.